Another long video here. This is SolidWorks training video number 4, Assembly Tips and Tricks. Let's look at the options that are available for the Insert Component dialog. So when I first create an assembly, File, New Assembly, which is what I did, you're probably looking at something like this. The reason that this comes up at the beginning is because of this first option right here, Start Command when creating new assembly. And it's talking about starting the Insert Component command, again, even though it says Begin Assembly. So if I uncheck that first option, close this down, and again go through File, New Assembly, now I'm looking at a blank assembly and I have to go through Insert Components to start adding components. The second option underneath these options says Automatic Browse when creating a new assembly. So this controls that File Explorer pop-up that you have seen. So if I close this down, go back through File, New Assembly. Now that I've got that option unchecked, I do not automatically get that File Browse option. I have to click on Browse to get that option up. Just an FYI, I have not had 100% success with this option. It seems to also be somewhat controlled with whether or not I have any open part documents as well. So if I've got some files open, a couple of different parts already open inside SolidWorks, and I go through File, New Assembly at this point, now even though this is checked, I'm not getting my file browse, and that's because I've got parts that are loaded inside SolidWorks. So your specific behavior may vary on your computer as well. The third option, Graphics Preview, I can't imagine not having this on. So right now, if I'm getting ready to drop a part, I can see where it's going to go. If I turn off Graphics Preview, I don't see it. That is not something that I find desirable at all. So I always want that Graphics Preview in place. We've also seen this Show Rotate Context toolbar. That's this toolbar right here, which, by the way, can be moved. So you can move it around a little bit to kind of get it in a better position for you to click and actually see the rotations taking place. If I uncheck that, then that toolbar goes away. The next two options are really useful, especially as you advance through using SolidWorks, and they are options I was not familiar with until I started creating these training videos for you guys. So the first one we're going to look at is actually the second from the bottom, this envelope. If I select an envelope for a part, or if I check this, parts that I add will be added as envelope parts. And the easiest way to describe an envelope part is to say it's a reference part. It's not really there. And what I'm going to do at this point is actually bring up one of our assemblies from Black Arrow this past year, which is the glyph gripper. So if we look at the build glyph gripper, here it is. If we look at this assembly, you may notice I have actually hidden a part. Now this is actually a very good thing right now. If you ever get a dialog like this, rebuild this document, always rebuild. right here is an actual glyph, and I'm going to show it right now. So, and I'll show you how to do that a little bit later. That'll be one of the tricks I'm going to show you. But in creating this component, Michael and I needed to make sure that it was going to grab a glyph appropriately. So in doing so, we put a glyph in the assembly, and then we hit it. It would have been much more appropriate to make that part an envelope part. And I can actually do that now at this point. If I go in on the part, right-click on the part, and bring up the Components Properties dialog, there is an option right here to make it an envelope part. Now you'll see the icon on it has changed, and it's a little transparent, so we can kind of see through the part. That's your visual reminder that this is an envelope part, and here is your reminder on the assembly tree itself. So on the Insert Component dialog, if I open up several parts, and start dropping a few different parts out here, if I check envelope, this part will be added as an envelope part, and then I can uncheck envelope, and anything else I add, even the same part, I might add a non-envelope version of the part. And again, you can see the difference there on the envelope part, and you can see the difference here too. Now, again, later in this video, I'm going to show you how you can create what's called a bill of materials, and envelope parts are not included in the bill of materials. So stand by for that, and we'll cover that a little bit later. The last option in our dialog is called Make Virtual. Make Virtual says that the component will actually be added into the assembly or added as inside the assembly files. It won't be an external reference. So to show you what I'm talking about here, let's say I've got a few of these aluminum beams here in a assembly. So I drop each one. And this third one, I'm going to make it virtual. Now what you can see here is this beam and this beam both say aluminum beam, yada, yada, yada. This one says copy of. When I save this file, these two are going to actually be pointers to that external file. So that file that's located here, this will actually just be a pointer to this file. But my 11-hole beam, this part will actually be imported and saved inside this assembly. So there are reasons to do that, and we may explore some of that as the season progresses, but for right now I want you to just go ahead and leave that option off. Don't bother to go in and make any of your parts virtual inside your assemblies, and we may discuss some reasons for doing that in the future. On occasion, when you open up an assembly, especially one that somebody else has worked on, created, and they've sent you the assembly file, you're going to get something that looks like this. It's going to be a dialog that says, I can't find the file I'm looking for, unable to locate this file. Now, this does require some knowledge of what is that file. Why can't I find it? For instance, I know in this case what happened. was this assembly was referring to an external document that I used to help create the curves and the claw, this specific shape on this claw. And when I created it, it was just a Sim1. It was just the default name for it. When I was renaming all my files in order to post these things for you guys to use, I renamed it Molded Claw Maker. However, I never changed the pointer inside this file. Now, again, I'm intimately aware of what happened with this, why it happened, and I know exactly what file to go open. If you don't know that specific kind of information, then it's a little bit of a different ballgame. You might need to find out from the creator of the assembly, what file do you have? Do I have all the files? Did you send me all the files that you used to create this assembly? So that's what that's about. I just wanted you to be familiar with it in case it came up, you knew what you were looking at. Here is something else you're going to see quite a bit, especially as you're creating some moving assemblies inside SolidWorks. So as I was playing around and moving our claw around a little bit, SolidWorks popped up this little additional symbol beside this icon. Looks like a little stoplight without the yellow, just a red and green stoplight. And if you'll notice, that exactly matches this menu option up here. What SolidWorks is trying to tell me is that I'm not sure everything is still exactly the way it's supposed to be. Next time you get a chance, press rebuild. So that's what I'm going to do, is rebuild, and you'll notice those things went away. So SolidWorks has a lot of things that it's keeping track of between all of the components, all of the mates between all the different components and everything else. And I guess at times it's just saying, hey, force a recheck on all of my rules to make sure all of my rules are still being enforced. I believe that's what the rebuild does. However, when you see some components that require or that have that stoplight out there, it is smart to go ahead and do a rebuild so that you are making sure that all the rules are enforced as you're making any additional changes to the assembly. Okay, if you remember when we talked about moving this channel, this cross channel back a hole, I went down here and I looked for the different mates that were involved. I did that because I had not shown you this trick yet, but there is a better method. If I want to find the mates for this, now remember, this is a subassembly at this point, so I have to go up here. I've clicked, I found the channel, but I want the entire subassembly in this assembly. So if I look directly underneath, inside the tree, directly underneath any part or any assembly, the first item is mates in, and then the name of this assembly. Of course, I'm labeled this SWT for SolidWorks Training Number 3, full chassis. Now I can see here are all of the mates for this subassembly with anything else inside my assembly. So I can see the coincident mate over here. I can see the coincident mate on the other side. I can see 1, 2, 3, 4 concentric mates. Those were the ones that we broke in order to, or deleted in order to move the channel. Then I can see the coincident mates. These are the actual screws, and then the coincident mates over here. Now, you may be looking at these things. The symbols over here, these correspond to the mate types. And I'm not familiar with exactly what the different symbols look like. I don't know them on site at this point. The concentric is pretty easy to see because it's a couple of circles. I'm not sure what that's supposed to be with the coincident mate. But if you'll notice, we have some of these mates have this additional symbol beside it. And if you'll notice, every one of these is a mate with this channel. So this one is a mate with that channel, this one is a mate with that channel, and so forth. SolidWorks is telling us that this mate is mating with a fixed part. Remember, we did talk about that a little bit, and I'm going to get into that a little bit more later on during this video as well. But all that is saying is this mate is between my assembly here, or even if it was just a part, and a fixed component inside the assembly. So, useful information, makes it much easier to find specific mates that I am interested in. I want to show you one of my favorite little tools inside SolidWorks. So if I'm inserting a component and I forget to do the rotation or something of that nature, and I just drop it in here. Now, let's say I wanted to turn this thing 90 degrees along the x-axis. If I right-click on a component, one of my options is Move with Triad. So the Move with Triad brings up this nifty little tool right here. And what you will see is I've got 3 arrows along each one of the axes. And then I've also got some curves between some of the axes. If I grab an arrow, so now that this tool is up, use the regular left click. If I grab an arrow, I'm simply moving the part in 3-dimensional space along that axis, which is a little bit more precise than just grabbing the part and moving it around. Now I know specifically where I'm moving it. In fact, SolidWorks is actually giving me a ruler here, although sometimes those numbers can be hard to see with other parts in the background. Now, similarly, these curves around will rotate the piece. So if I want to rotate it along the x-axis, I'm actually grabbing this curve, the one that's in between the y and the z. If I grab that curve and start to move, you'll see my part starts to rotate. Again, I do have numbers, so I can look for specifically that 90-degree number and try and stop it on that 90-degree. And I think I missed it just a little bit. Again, the numbers are sometimes hard to see, but it is very, very useful. So again, Move with Triad. I find the part, right click on the part. It has to be a part that's moving, so I can't have a part that's fixed. If I try and do this with a part like this and say Move with Triad, it's not moving. The component can't be moved because it's fully defined. So I might be able to move a component in one direction or another if it is still allowed to rotate. For instance, my screws down here. I bet you I could move it, rotate it with the Triad. See, that will rotate because the screw is not defined in that way, but I cannot move it out. I try to or move it side to side, and it just does not move. So right click, move with Triad, have some fun. So I drug in some of the major parts from our first assembly that we built as an example for the next concept I want to show you. So at this point, let's say I really want to drag this bracket back so that it's lined up with these beams. I try and drag it and I get selected component is fixed. And notice also, even with the move with Triad that we saw in the last example, move with Triad is not available on my context menu at this point. And the reason for all that is, if I look over here, there's the little F that tells me that this part is fixed. So if I want to change that and make this a float part, I need to right click on the part over here, and then I can click on float. Notice that is also available on my context menu over here. So in either place, when I click on float, now I get the dash there. Now I can drag the piece. Now move with Triad is available, and I can move this thing around as I would like. So I strongly discourage you from leaving any assembly in this manner where all parts are floating. So at this point, what I would want is to determine what part do I want to have fixed? What part in here do I want to be my main part that can't be moved? And I would probably choose one of the two beams. So in either case, again, right click here, click on fix, or the context menu, when I click on the part itself, I can click on fixed. Now this is a fixed part. Notice it does not change the order of the parts in the assembly. It merely changed which part is fixed, cannot be moved, and it allows, of course, all the other parts that are still as float to move around it. So now I can make my mates with this fixed part. If I do desire to change the order of the parts, I can do that by clicking in the tree and dragging. And you'll see the text is changing. Move below this bracket, move below this bracket, move below origin. So now that bracket is now my first part as well as being fixed. And if I want to group like items together, I can move this bracket as well and move it under I can take that beam and move it underneath the fixed beam as well. So there will be times when you want to move things around where SolidWorks won't let you. And I do not have a firm grasp on when SolidWorks will and when SolidWorks will not let you move parts around on the tree like this. But as long as it allows you to move something to a spot where you would rather have it, take advantage of it and group things, move things the way you would like it. So there's actually a better option for organizing my parts inside of assembly other than simply dragging them around and putting components next to each other. And that option is folders. So there are two ways to create a folder inside of an assembly. The first would be a right-click, make new folder. So what I'm supposed to do is to find the spot in the tree where I want the folder. So let's say I want it in between this aluminum beam and this bracket. I click on the bracket, and that's a right click. So right click on the bracket, and then near the bottom I'll see this create new folder option. And you can see the folder is actually placed in between the beam and the beam bracket. And now it is allowing me to change the name of this, and I'm going to call it brackets with the R, because I'm going to use this folder to hold my two brackets. So that's the next thing. At this point, it's an empty folder. I'm going to take these two parts, select both of them, normal left click, click and drag, and it moves those two parts into the folder. So this helps me organize and better keep track of my different parts. Now, I said there were two options. The other option would be if I know I'm going to take these four parts, these four screws, and I'm going to put them all in a single folder. I can highlight them first, right click. Do not be concerned, and I'm glad this happened because it does it a lot. Do not be concerned that one of those unhighlighted. SolidWorks still knows that all four of them were selected. One of my little pet peeves, but everything works out fine. So I've highlighted the four of them. I've right clicked, and then I come down here and you see add to new folder. So I select that option, and boom, you can see all four of them have kind of disappeared. They are actually inside this folder. And now again, it's asking me to rename that folder. So at this point, I can look and I'll see that when I expand this folder, there's my screws. When I expand that folder, there's my brackets. And I can do the same thing that I just did with the nuts. And if I really want to take things to another level, I can put folders inside of folders. So I can take these three folders that I've created and add all of those to a new folder. So all my mounting hardware, the brackets, the screws, the nuts, are all inside this one folder, and then each one of my individual parts are inside. And you'll notice when I click on a folder, it does highlight all the parts that are inside that folder. I can expand the folder and highlight the individual items. I can expand the individual items, look at the mates for that individual items, etc. But like I said, creating folders is one of my favorite methods for organizing the parts inside of an assembly. The next thing I want to show you here is how we can change the visibility of certain parts. So as you can see, I've undone the folder moving that I've done over here just so that it's easier to get to my individual parts. And there are two different options I want to show you. One is the hide option. So let's look at this top bracket. If for some reason I want to hide that part, make it so that it's not visible, I right click, and then you can see this eye with a slash through it. Says hide components. So I click on that and it disappears. Now it is still here in my assembly. In fact, when I select it, I see the outline and it's somewhat transparent. And then when it's not selected, it's gone again. I can also see the icon has changed into one that is clear instead of yellow like the rest of them. Now, when I want to see it again, I right click, and again, the eye no longer has a slash through it, and the option says show components. So I click on that and the component shows up again. This is also available through the right click inside the 3D model itself. I have the ability to hide. I do not, of course, have the ability to re-show because I can't find it to click it. So then I do have to find it in the tree, and then I can show the component again. So the other option that I wanted to show you right now was transparency. Again, right click or even left click. This was a simple left click brings up this context menu. The right click brings up the full menu. So even the right click will bring up this one with that eyeball and this change transparency. So the transparency keeps the item out there, but makes it so that, yes, I can see through it. It's transparent like a piece of glass. Again, This is available through the right-click menu. Now, what's really interesting about the change transparency is now, if there is any part behind that transparent part, when I hover, I'm actually going to be selecting that item that's behind. It's like the transparent item is no longer available for me to click on. That's if there's any item behind it. Here you can see up top, there's nothing behind this spot. So here I'm still actually selecting my transparent component. But it does make it easy, transparency does, to keep the item visible, yet see what's going on behind it. There is another very powerful tool inside SolidWorks for seeing what's going on inside of an assembly other than just hiding parts and making them transparent, and that is the section view. The section view is accessed from one of these icons up above, this icon right here, and when you hover over it, you'll see section view. When I first click on it, it's a little scary because it looks like my entire model just disappeared. But what you will see here, this is a plane, and these controls here look very similar to the move with Triad. If I grab a hold of this arrow and pull, the plane moves with the arrow, and pretty soon parts of my model start showing up. And what you see is, this is like I've taken a knife and cut through my model right there at that point. So I can see everything that's going on in the middle of my model. So I can move it. If I have a need to save it and really examine things with the section view in place, I can then click on the green OK, and then my model is cut. Everything is still there, and all I have to do is click on the icon again to turn off the section view and show everything. So a little bit more about using the section view. So when we first click on it, it will bring up the last section view settings that we have. But what if I want to look at a little bit of a different view? What if I want this plane turned vertically instead of horizontally, or something like that, along the x-axis or the y-axis instead of along the z-axis? Well, right here is the three main planes that we deal with, and I'm going to change it right now to the right plane, and you can see that that immediately jumped to the point of being along the right hand plane. Again, I can do the top plane as well, and now I'm slicing in this direction. So what can I do with the section view? Well, remember we talked about those screws and how it was important that we used the 0.25 screws coming into the chassis, and we were going to use the 375 screws on these side or on these cross channels. I can now, with this section view, get a very, very close and detailed view of what's going on inside of that mount, where the screws are actually coming in and meeting. And you can see that my screw head for the 0.25 screw is really starting to intrude on the threads of the 375 screw. And you may take that knowledge and say, this screw does not fit there, I need to use one of the other threaded holes on the mount instead of using the 0.25 screws here. But I believe what happened in practice with us anyway, when we actually built this, was as we attached these screws, it probably crushed the threads a little bit and kind of acted as a little bit of a thread locker, kind of really made sure this screw was not going to back out because of the friction applied by this screw. But what I wanted you to see more than anything was this ability to use the section view and the ability to really examine some of the details of what's going on the inside of your assembly. And like I said, you'll be able to use this for parts as well, which we will examine more as we start getting into making our own parts. Now, we've talked about being able to choose one of the 3 planes. You can also use these 2 angle changers to change your angle in that type of a fashion. And you really have no limit as far as what angle you can slice your model when you're looking at it through the section view. This next option is kind of cool, especially when you're dealing with larger assemblies. Let me show it to you first on one that you're familiar with. So we can easily see when we click on this part, we can see it in the assembly. But there will be times, especially with larger assemblies, where you click on a part and you still don't see it. Maybe it's hidden, maybe because of the view it's behind something else. If you right click on the part, there is an option called Isolate. And if you click on Isolate, everything else quickly vanishes and that part is left standing. And then you can see this option right here gives you an option to exit Isolate. I'm not sure what the Save as Display State does. I've only used this for identifying where a part is locating. Then when you exit Isolate, everything comes back. So if we, for instance, bring up the claw and wrist assembly from this past year, and we want to find Smiley, and we click on him, and we just don't see him. Where is he? Now I can right click and isolate, and there he is. There's Smiley. And now I can rotate a little bit, exit isolate, and now I see him in his position. I have no idea why this thing just turned green all the way throughout. For the record, a rebuild put everything back to the colors it was supposed to be. Just thought I'd give you that quick update. So we saw in our first basic navigation video how we can take an assembly or a part and choose a different display style. So we can get rid of the lines. We can make it a hidden lines removed, things of that nature. And you'll notice when I'm doing this, yes, it is affecting the entire assembly here. We can do that on a part-by-part basis as well. And there are two ways to do that. To me, the harder way is to do a right-click and then a component display. So you can see, to begin with, the option default display is checked. That means this part will follow whatever is chosen up at the top for the default display. However, if I change this one to hidden lines removed, you can see the rest of my model is now shaded with lines, and this is hidden lines removed. Now I can go in, and if I change my model to just shaded, it changes all the other parts, but it does not change the part that I have specifically requested to be different. Now, like I said, to me, right-clicking and going through this component display is the harder way to do it. The easier way for me, you will see up at the top here a little right arrow, or a triangle, or a caret, if you will. When I click on that, this additional set of options opens up on a part-by-part basis. Now I can change the display part or the display style of a specific part through this option right here. So I can change that one to wireframe. I can change this one to shaded with edges. And you can see now when I change my, when I change my default back to shaded with edges, I'm only changing the parts that I have not given some specific display style to. At any point in time, I can change my parts back to the default, and then they will follow my default display style up at the top. So I've showed you this quick option for the display style. That quick option can be used for other things that we've already covered as well. This icon right here will make a part transparent. I'm sorry, will hide a part. This fourth row here, where you actually do not see any kind of an icon, that is your transparency. So that will make a part transparent. And then you get the transparent icon there. You click on it again, and it's no longer transparent. We will cover this one in just a few minutes. Or maybe we'll cover it right now. This icon here will allow you to change the appearance of a part. And when we're talking about the appearance, we're talking about the color. So let's say I want to take my nuts and make them green. I can click on that, click on appearance, and then this dialog over here to the left, or this wizard over here to the left, appears. Now, up at the top, see selected geometry. It defaults to apply at the component level. Leave that checked. If you select this option here, apply at part document level, what you're telling SolidWorks is, I want to go back and change this part. Remember, we have links to files in our file system, and if I change it at the part level, I'm changing the actual part document, and then every screw from here on out will be green. So here are some basic easy colors to select from. Here is the full color spectrum box, whatever you feel comfortable with as far as changing colors. You also have your typical RGB sliders here if you're familiar with the most Windows applications and their color selectors and how they worked, or you can use the HSV option as well. So whatever you're familiar with and however you like to define your colors is okay. They also have this option here, which I'm not 100% familiar with, but I believe what it's trying to say is that if I change the display state, then the color will not carry over. But you are welcome to play around with this and see what it does on your own. So I've changed this to green. I hit the green arrow, say OK, and you can see my appearance here icon is now showing that color as well. What's really nice about this is I can also now click on this part, and that's a regular left click. I can click on that part, and now there is a copy appearance icon there. I can select that. Now go to my next nut and use the paste appearance icon. And on to the next nut and the next nut. I have not had great success doing a multi-select. Let's try it again. Maybe this is different in 2017. Oh, beautiful. I did not have success with that in 2016. So you can see you can multi-select multiple parts and paste the appearance all at one time. You should be able to also multi-select parts then and change the appearance. So when you click this appearance here, you're going to get this kind of an icon or this kind of a menu option. This does give you the ability to remove any appearances that you've added. But generally speaking, you're clicking at this level, not down here. So I click at that level there, and I'm going to make these brackets yellow, and boom. So now you can have fun not only building your assemblies, but coloring the parts. And try and use some logic. Don't just make a rainbow for the sake of making a rainbow. Color the parts in some logical fashion that makes sense. So for instance, if we look at this claw assembly, the yellow parts are stoppers. These are things that we had added to the assembly that keep this the rotation in check. The orange parts are the main part that control movement throughout the assembly. So there was thought and forethought into how we were going to color the parts. It was not simply adding color for the sake of color. So do keep that in mind when you're coloring your individual parts on your assemblies. The last tool I'm going to show you tonight is probably the most useful tool I have found in SolidWorks, bar none. So we've spent our time, we've put this thing together. Now we want to physically build this thing, whatever it is that we've built in SolidWorks. And we would think that our option is to go through and find all the parts that are listed over here in our parts tree or in our assembly tree and figure it out that way. It's not easy to find, but SolidWorks gives an awesome tool, and it's called Bill of Materials. Bill of Materials is a standard in industries, period, a standard terminology for a list of parts or something that I need to go out and purchase or acquire. We actually go through the Insert menu. Underneath Insert, you will see Tables, and underneath Insert Tables, you will see Bill of Materials. I do not know about all the other ones. I am very familiar with Bill of Materials just because it's so useful. When you select that option, you are again given this dialog. All I really know is I just select all the defaults. Whatever the default options that are coming up here, I'm happy with, and I just say OK. The next option that comes up is SolidWorks is asking for me to select an annotation view. I know a little bit about what they are, but I'm not familiar with annotation views well enough that I am using them. So I just say use the existing view. Okay. Now you can see it's giving me this table and letting me place it somewhere. I just generally click and boom. This is now in my SolidWorks document. Actually, I don't ever leave it here. I take it to the very next step, which is the next logical step for me anyway. When I hover over this, you'll see that there is this icon over here on the top left. I can right click on this And don't get fooled by that dialog that came over here. What I'm looking for is in this menu here, this Save As option. I can now save this table, not as the default, but as an Excel file. So I can come over here, SolidWorks Training. I'm just going to call this BOM. It will save as a Excel file. And now I have a BOM Excel file sitting in that directory. I can double click on that, open it up in Excel, and voila, there everything is. What SolidWorks does is it finds the like parts and gives me a quantity. So where I might be myself counting, oh, here's a screw, oh, here's a screw, SolidWorks has done all of that hard work for me. Now, we have talked previously about a couple of different options, most specifically the envelope option. So if you remember, envelope allows me to take a part and specify it as an envelope part, and that's located through the component properties. When an item is specified as an envelope part, it is there for reference only. It will not show up, therefore, on my bill of materials, which is extremely useful. I'm just over and over again impressed with SolidWorks, and the bill of materials is one that I just absolutely love. Now, like I said, I generally speaking do not keep this out here. I will export it to Excel, and then I will generally come and delete it. And then I'll go through the process again if I make changes and need to get an updated bill of materials list. Okay, final assignment from this video. I want you to take the chassis that you've already built, and I want some wheels on the front and back. So think about what is required to add the wheels to this chassis. What are we going to need? We're going to need some flanged ball bearings inside the channel. We're going to need an axle running through that. We're going to need maybe a spacer or two on either side. We are definitely going to need a collar or some other kind of stop on the far end. We're going to need a hub on this end that matches our shaft diameter. So you're probably going to use 0.25 shafts. So you need to make sure you use a 0.25 hub. And then you're going to want to use the Omni wheels. So the parts you're looking for look like these. So this is the Omni wheel. This is the clamping hub. This is a shaft. These are the flanged ball bearings that will fit inside the channel. This is a spacer in case you want spacers on your shaft, which you will definitely want a spacer on the wheel side. And then this is your flanged coupler collar, or your flanged coupler or collar. I have specifically not told you exactly which parts they are because I want you to go out and find these parts. I want you to start becoming familiar with the parts that are in the Servo City parts folder. So if you really get stuck, let me know. We'll be meeting obviously on Thursday nights so you can ask me then. If you get stuck and don't want to wait, you can send me an email. Good luck, guys.